So, I'm going to pose a question. Is Final Fantasy truly the king of RPGs? Short answer, no they're not, but there is a long answer that I would love to discuss with you guys. I played a lot of the games, this is opinionated, and please let me know your opinion in the comments down below. Do you agree with me or you disagree? So, let's get started. Final Fantasy was once the most important RPG, especially through the 90s and 2000s. But let's be honest, it kind of fell from its heyday, and there are certain factors that played into it. And the first point is the evolution of the JRPG landscape. For decades, Final Fantasy has captured the hearts of many gamers through its games for being a whimsical fantasy type story with memorable characters that you can't help but love. However, Final Fantasy was not the only player in the game. Games like Persona, Nier, and the Atelier series, for example. Okay, maybe not the Atelier series, that's more of my bias showing, but you get the idea. They all bring something new to the table. I'm gonna use this game again, but Persona 5 is just a good example, and the way it made itself different from the other RPGs was its blend of high school mechanics, dungeon crawling, the unique demons you find, and its unique storytelling that's not only good, but it resonates with a lot of people because it involves a more personal experience than this whole we have to save the world kind of thing. I mean, there is still we have to save the world kind of thing, but it's more of an introspective kind of game. Indeed, there were multiple games coming out that not only wanted to capture the hype of Final Fantasy, but wanted to make their own mark on the JRPG landscape. But being Final Fantasy, they had a huge stake in this pond of different JRPGs. They were basically the big fish in the pond. But that doesn't last forever. Now, point number 2 is the stagnating story. You might be a little bit confused when I say stagnating story because Final Fantasy always changes its story, but don't let that deceive you. The story is kind of the same in a lot of them. One thing about Final Fantasy is their games look gorgeous. But that comes at a price because the formula has been somewhat stale. The franchise has been criticized for playing it too safe, relying on familiar themes, and not taking enough risks to advance the genre. And to clearly emphasize my point, Naoki Yoshida, also known as Yoshi P, openly acknowledged that the Final Fantasy series is facing difficulties in adapting to current industry trends. As the lead developer of Final Fantasy 16, his statement carries a lot of weight and reflects the challenges the franchise is currently facing. I feel nowadays Final Fantasy has become more streamlined, and while that's a good thing because more people get to enjoy it, a lot of things suffered because of it, and I feel like it doesn't have really the heart and soul as it used to. Now, I still love some Final Fantasy games. I am loving Final Fantasy 16. It is really good. So Final Fantasy has been falling behind because they change their stories with every game, and sometimes creating a new universe and world for each game might not be the way. So I could kind of get why their stories become more streamlined and simplified because thinking of a whole new story for a whole new game is very chaotic. And aside from recurring things like chocobos, moogles, and summons, everything else has to be new. And that's why the storylines can feel very stagnated or samey because it has to be. It's like writing characters, plot points, and stuff just to discard them for the next game. Now, there is exceptions to this rule, like sequels and side games, but more than not, it's a new universe stuff. Now, Nomura wanted to try a consolidated storyline. That's why we got the Fabula Nova Crystallis thing. I thought that was a good idea. If it wasn't so complicated and convoluted, I was like, yeah, that's a good idea. But it ultimately just didn't go as planned. I feel like they put a lot of stake into how the game looks and not how the game plays or the story or none of that. And that's a huge problem because it's an RPG. The main thing is the story, but they seem to be pushing just graphics. How do we make this thing more flashy? And again, I don't mind that if they have the time, resources, effort, but they clearly don't because they miss on certain other departments, but there's always a flashy fight scene. But honestly speaking, Final Fantasy 16 is gorgeous. It is a work of art. And good lord, does it push the PS5 to its limits because I've seen people's PS5 just stop working because it overheats. Now, mine doesn't overheat because I have it in a well-ventilated area, but man, that thing roasts your PS5 like no one's business. Now, I will give credit where credit is due. Final Fantasy 16 tackles a lot of heavy subjects and trying to go against the grain, but they need to do a little bit better than that, honestly. All I'm saying is some innovation will breathe a lot of life into these games again. Point number 3, lack of consistency. It can be challenging for fans to anticipate what's in store for the new Final Fantasy game, since each one seems to strive for something unique. I know in the past I've said that they're kind of stagnating, but what I mean here is they always try something different for a newer audience and not their fans. So in the past I was talking about the story and stuff, but with the gameplay they change it up on the fly, kind of like Sonic the Hedgehog. Now to be honest, I don't mind the action gameplay combat. I'm more of a story person, but I can see how some fans are like, man, I just want a nice turn-based combat. Now there are other games in Square Enix's library that cater to turn-based, like Octopath Traveler and Bravely Default, but some people want a Final Fantasy turn-based combat. So with Final Fantasy 16, it does return to its roots with the crystals, the fantasy setting, the powers, and the summons. The gameplay and how it's presented has a lot of people mixed, and that's why some of the fans are like, this is not my Final Fantasy, or I don't recognize this Final Fantasy. Now, I don't really agree with it personally. I think Final Fantasy 16 is a Final Fantasy game, true and true, but I do acknowledge and respect people's opinion who feel like it's not their Final Fantasy game, because I can understand where they're coming from. Now, a perfect example for a series that has cohesion, in my opinion, is the Persona series. Each Persona game has a unique story, but it still has the same lore, so you're always gonna know what a persona is, Igor, the Velvet Room, all that stuff stays the same, and it makes the world feel more connected, even though each number series has a different theme to it. Persona 3 tackles death, it has a blue motif, but it's still a Persona game. Persona 4 is set in a small town, the theme is yellow, and searching for the truth. With Persona 5, you're in a big city, the theme is red, and it's about rebelling against unjust authority. So it has a clear cohesion to it. You don't have to introduce a new lore, new universes, new gods or anything, because the persona stays the same, the Velvet Room the same, the demons, how to fuse them, mostly the same, and the gameplay keeps its turn-based roots with it. And I really think they need to stick to a formula that appeases the fans and newcomers alike. So in my opinion, is Final Fantasy still the golden standards of RPG? To me, no, it's not. I feel like there's other RPGs that kind of trump Final Fantasy in the long run, and while I do appreciate and respect and even like the Final Fantasy series, I feel like it's stuck in the past, but ultimately the answer depends on what you think. Tell me in the comments down below, do you think Final Fantasy is still the king of RPGs, or do you think the heyday of Final Fantasy is over? Alright, so that is it for the video. If you liked it, please hit that like button. If you like my content, I would love to see more. Please subscribe. If you're not ready, subscribe. Please tell me your opinions in the comments down below. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of the day, and as always, play a good game. Peace.